Are these all shield lakes in this experimental area, and are there any areas that are being tested that are not shield lakes?
Well, no, they're all within the shield. So they're all within a fairly. It's 27,000 hectares. So they're all the lakes are within this enclosed geographic area, and I'll get to, what the conditions are for what we can do within this area, and we can't operate on anything outside of that enclosed area. So it's all a fairly homogeneous group of lakes.
Are they all in the same watershed?
They're all in the same watershed. Yeah. So there's no rivers that are except for one, which is on the outskirts, which is an unperturbed. They haven't done any experiments on it. They're all exactly. I mean, some are. This is a small one. I can't remember the number of this, but they're all fairly. For example, by Great Lakes standards or by like Winnipeg standard, these are small lakes that you would find, for example, north of Ottawa. You could paddle across this probably in less than 15 minutes. So Lake 226, you could walk around it in probably something like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. So they're enclosed, but and then some are larger, which I'll get to one. So another example. This is probably I got this a little out of order. So, but so what we do with the experimental lakes area is have our own full-time scientific staff, as well as make this facility available to researchers from around the world. So this is a paper based on a researcher, I think, from Dalhousie, if I'm not right. There's been people from Trent, there's a couple of universities in the United States. But one of them was looked at the impacts of pharmaceuticals on the environment and wildlife, and the lead author, Catherine Arnold, published this in, I think, 2014, late 2014. And it was basically looking at the potential impacts of pharmaceutical contaminants, particularly on endocrine disruptors. So this was a fairly significant finding in terms of actually finding evidence of some causality between those trace elements of discarded pharmaceuticals, which we have in our drinking water systems and elsewhere, and then what there might be some potential human health impacts on endocrine disruptors, which have implications for reproductive systems, etc.
So question?
Yeah,
are they finding pharmaceuticals up there?
No, this was again a controlled experiment where they took trace. Yeah,
I was going to say that's a pretty isolated thing. I hope there wouldn't be up there yet.
No, exactly. Yeah.
So being isolated and not having rivers and not having a lot of groundwater, the source of water here is snow melt and precipitation, basically. Right?
Yeah, I'll get to one. So maybe the next slide. So this is the other thing that's there is an Environment Canada meteorological station, one of the national stations, which was across Canada, and the reason why. And we maintain this on behalf of Environment Canada. And the reason why then this is really useful, so this is one of these, it's basically a simple glass device, and it's a very reliable way of measuring hourly sunlight, because they put a piece of paper at the bottom of this every morning, and then they can measure how much of the paper has been burnt at what time of the day, and then from that you can tell how much direct sunshine there's. There's all sorts of other sort of data uplinks with GPS systems, but this is something that they've been used probably since the 18th century, and this is an updated version of it. The reason I mention it is because what they'll also do is look at wind conditions, temperature conditions. So what it does is give the background ambient conditions. So for long-range transport of pollutants, for example, they can do an overlay if there's something, for example, like mercury, trace mercury or NOx or SOx, and that goes into helping the scientists in looking at the controlled experiments what might be coming from outside direct inputs from the lakes. So next slide. So in 2012, for those of you who might remember, in 2012, the previous government, the Harper government, decided that they didn't want to do this anymore, and so they were going to shut down the experimental lakes area, which was really an odd reason for a couple of reasons. So one was, this is the only site in the world that does whole lake, whole ecosystems experiments. There's no other country in the world that does this. So that would be number one. But even from a budgetary perspective, in 2012, if you remember the economic recovery plan, the signs of building Canada, well, there was one at the Experimental Lakes area because federal government, through Department of Fisheries and Oceans, had spent several millions of dollars building new state-of-the-art labs, other facilities, and 2 residences. So they just finished building these, and then they announced that they were going to discontinue funding and shut it down. So I think, I don't know why they did it. There's all sorts of different theories on why they did it. But what it did do was create a groundswell of public opinion on the importance of public science, the role of the federal government in public science. And I think then what it did was create a groundswell of public opinion that people may not understand what our scientists do. I don't understand what our scientists do, but people place a huge value on independent science. And for those of you that saw the CBC report this morning about Harvard University cooking their numbers for the sugar industry, I think what it just underscores the science policy that having that Canada's federal scientists in Parks Canada, in Environment Canada, and Fisheries and Oceans are among the best in the world. I mean, Canada led the world in the 1980s and 1990s in showing countries around the world how ministries of environment function and work. And that's not an understatement. I was at the UN Environment Program in Nairobi, and you'd have countries coming from around the world to want to talk to people like Vic Buxton, who was one of the architects of the Montreal Protocol, and elsewhere. So anyway, this was really a lot more than just the Experimental Lakes area. And so we had, and I then, next slide, I started with IISD just over 3 years ago, and I think by our first board meeting, our board said, so it wasn't me, our board said, my colleagues at ISD think that we can save it, and we really have no idea how. So we began negotiations with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and I have to say, it was among the most interesting 11 months I've spent of my life. We got an outside counsel from a law firm here in Ottawa, and we spent almost $800,000 on legal opinions related to that negotiation. And I think I say that just to underscore the complexity of what was entailed in this, because it was going from federal government operations to having a private operator that was intentionally polluting. So just one example, going to the insurance company, and the insurance company was saying, okay, we'll give you all sorts of insurance for accidental, contaminants of all the listed chemicals for which you're not allowed to spill anything, and if you do, you have to move quickly because you have to do a response. And so no, we actually intentionally want to spill this into the lake. And you could just hear them on the other phone, like this was a crank call and they hung up on you. So that would be, and what we also did was for which I'm really proud, we had new federal regulations come out of Environment Canada and Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Ontario for the first time, which carved out the ability of experimental lakes to actually do these types of experiments. So it was a lot of really complicated moving parts, and we signed the agreement with Ontario and with Canada on April 1st, 2014. So we've been running it as IISD Experimental Lakes Area since 2014. So it's just come up on 2 years. It's something I'm really proud of. And I'll just tell you very quickly, and then I'll go to some other areas that we've been doing. So among I mentioned the continuation of the work that we're doing now, so the pressures that now for mercury, other contaminants that on water quality that this region certainly faces. But there's a whole new generation of micropollutants and other synthetic chemicals for which we really don't have a strong understanding. So one example of what they've been working on is a nanosilver experiment with Trent University, and that is what they'll do is just look at these controlled inputs within these specified locations, specified diameters, and then you can see it here to give you some sense of the size. And this is now going to its third year of first doing the reference point and then going back to do it. So nanosilver is a micropollutant, something you can only see through through a microscope. And it's used probably in all the clothing that we're wearing today. It's used for different reasons. I think there may be another slide, or I may have taken it out. No, I took it out. But it's used, for example, in sports, clothing and socks and others. And I think what we don't understand is, what no one understands is what are the physical dynamics of these chemicals and these synthetic chemicals when they're then exposed to the environment. Nobody knows. Nobody has an answer about what this will do in terms of its impacts. And so this would be one example of a new generation of work that they're doing. And then very briefly,